Hi there, everyone. I am Tina Falant, and I am here at Indiana University staging, rehearsing, and coaching Mark Morris's Sandpaper Ballet with music by Leroy Anderson. I started dancing when I was about 5 or 6. Um, my wonderful mother, who is still around at age 98, was a Broadway and television dancer in the 40s and 50s. And just like a lot of moms did, she sent my sister and myself and later my brother to dance school. And where I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, there was this wonderful place called the Academy of the Dance, directed by James Jameson and Helene Antonova. And Mr. Jameson had danced and worked a lot with Agnes de Mille. And Madame, as we called her, had danced with the ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. Um, so I started with ballet um, as a teenager, maybe junior high. I started taking modern classes. We had character classes. I was very devoted. I wanted to dance. Um, I went to college briefly. I left high school a year early and then decided that I wanted to try to pursue a ballet career in New York. So I enrolled at the Joffrey Ballet School and moved to New York in the late 1970s. And it was there, just coincidentally, one of the other gals in my class was from Seattle, and literally my first week in New York, she invited me to come and meet some of her friends from Seattle. And so we went to a party in the East Village, which in the 1970s was a little sketchy. Went into sort of a tenement-like building, walked up to the 5th floor, went into a sort of seedy apartment, and there were her friends, Mark and Penny. And that was Mark Morris and Penny Hutchinson, who later with me was a founding member of the Mark Morris Dance Group. So I moved pretty quickly from my ballet training into being a modern dancer. Um, but throughout the course of my career, always studied ballet. I had very serious Russian classical training. And so when Mark started staging ballets and creating ballets, I was a natural as his assistant because I understood the language. So when I first moved to New York in the late 70s, I studied only briefly at the Joffrey Ballet School. I had to leave the city. I had a little non-serious medical issue, moved back home to Delaware, went to Pennsylvania Ballet School, decided to move back to New York because at that point I thought maybe I wanted to be a Broadway dancer. I was searching around trying to find my place in dance. I landed back in New York, probably 78, 79, and I was just taking classes, trying to figure things out. Mark and I were out one day after class, and he said that he told me that he'd just gotten a grant from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts and that he was going to put together a concert the following year, about 6, 7 months later, and he asked me to be in it. And I was so stunned. I was like, what, me? I've never danced with anyone else in New York. Um, I had performed extensively as a teenager in Wilmington with my dance studio, but nothing had really come together for me. So, as it's been told in other places, Mark gathered together this group of friends. We did a performance at the Merce Cunningham Studio in November of 1980, and that was the first performance of the Mark Morris Dance Group. So my first performance in New York happened to coincide with the first performance of the Mark Morris Dance Group. Then the next couple years, Mark was still working as a dancer with Laura Lubavitch, with Hannah Kahn, with Laura Dean, and I performed in a few concerts with friends. I worked as a waitress, I worked as a dental receptionist, I had other jobs, but my main focus was always on Mark and his work, and we were also very close friends. So through the early 80s, One year we did our first show at the Cunningham Studio. Then the next year we did a couple performances at Dance Theater Workshop. People started to be interested in the work. The next year, 1982, we did a couple more shows. 1983, there were maybe some other things. 1984, we made our debut at the Brooklyn Academy of Music's Next Wave Festival. And there was an explosion of interest in the company and in Mark and in Mark's work. And in 1986, I quit all my other jobs and was able to be a dancer full-time in the Mark Morris Dance Group. And I continued to do that until January of 2000. So I want to talk a little bit about what I do as a stager and repetiteur. I myself get a little confused about which is which. Mark Morris is the choreographer of the Sandpaper Ballet. The piece was commissioned by San Francisco Ballet and was premiered in 1999. And Mark, in his choreographic process, he's creating the movement. In this instance, with the music of Leroy Anderson, there are short sections of music that were arranged to make a cohesive ballet. And I actually did, in my role as assistant, I helped Mark curate that. I was in the studio with him at all times, learning all the movement, helping him cast the sections of the ballet, who should do what, who should be where. And then in resetting the work in different places, I was here staging Sandpaper Ballet in 2018. I come in as a stager. I am teaching the choreography as it was staged, as it was set. It's also making this movement alive to dancers of successive generations and having references that they can understand about the movement. I feel my job is also to teach them about Mark's work and the impetus behind it, how important music and rhythm are, how important working together to make the choreography happen is. So staging, I think of as setting the ballet, and then I know that in like a ballet company like New York City Ballet or American Ballet Theater, the repetiteur is often someone who is a full-time employee there, and so they're working on specific ballets. So I kind of do a little bit of both, if that makes sense. Mark has very eclectic musical tastes and interests, and loves a broad array of music from Baroque to country and Western. And he was very interested in this music by Leroy Anderson because, yeah, it's very charming. It's also very well composed, and he was very excited about how it was orchestrated and that it can be done by big, huge orchestra. Leroy Anderson was the resident composer at the Boston Pops Orchestra. Some of these pieces, I think, I have to check, were written in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And Leroy Anderson was a master of the tune that will not get out of your head. You'll leave the theater and these pieces will be playing over and over again in your brain. Mark had done 2 previous world premieres for the San Francisco Ballet, and then I had also gone and staged an older work on them, Drink to Me Only with Thine Eyes, music by Virgil Thompson, which coincidentally has also been performed here at Indiana University. So he wanted to do something big for the company. He wanted to do a big orchestral piece because he loved the way the San Francisco Ballet Orchestra sounded. And so he lit upon doing these pieces. We listened, I know in our hotel rooms, we would listen together to all the different pieces. He wanted a waltz. He knew he wanted to start with the wonderful typewriter, where in the orchestra pit, the percussionist will be playing a typewriter, which some of us learned how to type in junior high and put the paper in, and you hear the bell and the return. And then he also loved the syncopated clock, which may be familiar to people of a certain age because it was the theme song to, I believe it was CBS, The Late Show, which showed classic movies from, I think that was on from the somewhere in the early 50s until the later 70s. Um, so he knew he wanted to do those two pieces, and then we selected different things in between to make a cohesive flow of choreography and situations. Mark has rightly been known for his musicality, his devotion to music. He will come into the studio with the musical score in hand. He studies it. I'm paraphrasing, but I think he said something to the effect of, I am a musician and dance is my medium or my instrument. So there'll be very nuanced musicality, um, interesting rhythm, and going back to the early days of the Mark Morris Dance Group, Mark specifically wanted to call it a group because he's very much still to this day very inspired by the idea of people dancing together instead of at the audience. And I think that this has a lot to do with, as a teenager, he was in a Balkan folk dance company in Seattle, Washington. And so there was this feeling of the collective moving together, doing very intricate rhythms, intricate relationship to the music. So that's very much a part of the Sandpaper Ballet. Um, there's some big sections, and if the company is not working together, everything will fall apart. um, so I think we can look for Mark's musicality. Um, I find in this particular piece, there's 25 dancers. Some of the sections start and end in a 25-person grid on the stage. So it's also Mark's interest in moving large groups around. There's an element of architecture. Um, I think it also reminds me a little bit of marching band, how some of the formations move. Um, One of my favorite sections, which is called Fiddle Faddle, very much has a showbiz sort of vaudeville element to it. And there, the dancers are dancing together, but they're also sharing their um, joy and love of movement and dance with the audience. The beautiful costumes for the Sandpaper Ballet are by the wonderful fashion designer Isaac Mizrahi. Mark and Isaac have been friends since the early 80s, mid 80s, and Isaac has done costumes for quite a few things for Mark's work. And Mark tapped Isaac for this piece because of his creativity and sense of humor and love of beauty and design and style. So the costumes are green. The bottom half is green, and then the top half is a blue and clouds and sky. And originally, and it should still work here in Indiana, the point where the green becomes the blue sky was the same number of inches from the floor. So as the dancers are standing in the grid, it looks like the horizon. So there's an element of endless landscape and scenery, which is also what makes me think of marching band, because you usually look at it from far away. And there's also a playfulness and an elegance. The dancers are wearing green gloves. Everyone's wearing green shoes. And it's very harmonious, the way that the costumes integrate with the music and the choreography. I think the costumes, they're one of my one of my favorite things that I've ever seen in Mark's ballets. And I know a wonderful costume designer in New York City who works a lot with ballet and with contemporary dancers has used the costumes in a lecture that they have done on the history of costumes in the 20th and 21st century because they are so special. I think they're really, really wonderful. I danced with the Markmas Dance Group from 1980 until I stopped performing in 2000. And all during that time, almost during the whole time I was performing, I was also teaching both ballet and modern and contemporary dance and staging Mark's work and acting as rehearsal director. Um, One of the things that's been so amazing is getting to travel all over the world to meet dancers from different countries, different backgrounds, with different experience. Um, I find it very inspiring just to have had the opportunity to work with so many great and dedicated artists who, it's not easy to be a dancer. And it's just inspiring to see how people approach the problems and the issues and the things that come up with this career that we're compelled to do. It's like dance chooses you in a way. You're a child and you're like, I have to dance, I must dance. So it keeps me going, and to be able to go back to my classes at Princeton to let them know about the greater worldwide dance community and how we can support and inspire each other to keep making art and um, to understand how transformative it can be. And it doesn't just change our hearts, it also changes our brains and how we relate to the world. So I hope to do that. I hope to keep doing that, to keep traveling, to keep meeting new artists for the foreseeable future.